The letter was 3 lines long. She read it twice, folded it in half, and set it on the table next to her coffee cup. Outside, the wind was moving through the cottonwoods the way it did before a dry spell settled in. Not hard, just persistent. She had learned to read wind the way other people read faces. The advertisement had been posted at the feed store in Laramie for 11 days before she answered it. She had walked past it 4 times. On the 5th time, she stopped and read it through. It said a man needed a capable woman for ranch work and household management. It said the ranch was in the Eastern Territory, 60 miles from the nearest town of any size. It said he was a widower. It said the work was steady and the pay was fair. It said nothing about companionship and nothing about love, and that was the part she appreciated most. She wrote back the same afternoon. She did not tell him about her husband, who had died of fever 3 winters ago, or about the child she had lost before that, or about the 2 years she had spent afterward working a neighbor's sheep flock just to have something that needed her. She told him her age, her experience, and that she could start within the month. She signed her name and mailed it before she could think too long about it. His reply came in 8 days. It said, "Come on the 14th. I'll send Orville to meet the stage." Orville turned out to be a boy of about 14 with large ears and no hat despite the June heat. He stood at the edge of the stage platform with his hands shoved into his pockets, scanning the passengers as they stepped down. When she came off the step with her trunk and her satchel, he looked at her, then looked away, then looked back. "You the one going out to the Crest Creek place?" he said. "I am," she said. He took her trunk without being asked and started toward the wagon. She followed. The wagon was a plain work rig, nothing special, the wood sun-bleached and the wheels recently retired. The horse was a bay, gelding with good legs and clean hooves. She noted these things automatically, the way a person notes the weather when they step outside, not thinking about it, just registering. They rode 62 miles without much conversation. She asked about the ranch. Orville said it was a cattle operation, about 800 head when it was running right, though it hadn't been running right in some time. She asked what he meant by that. He shrugged and said the man would explain it better than he could. She did not push. She watched the land instead. The grass changed as they moved east. Near Laramie, it had been green still, recent rain in the valleys. Out here, it was shorter, sparser, the kind of growth that came from a range pushed too hard over too many years, or a water source that had shifted. She could see where the cattle had been walking the same paths between the water and the grazing ground until the topsoil had compacted and the grass couldn't recover. The land wasn't ruined, but it was tired. The ranch house appeared at the edge of a long, flat run of ground framed by low ridgelines to the north and east. The house itself was good, solid timber, a working chimney, a porch that had been rebuilt more recently than the house. There were 2 barns, a bunkhouse, and a set of corrals that were too large for the number of cattle she had seen as they drove in. She counted. She was always counting. He was standing at the fence when they came into the yard. He was older than she had imagined, somewhere past 50, lean in the way of a man who had worked hard most of his life and wasn't carrying anything extra. He nodded once when she stepped down from the wagon. "You're the one who answered the letter," he said. "I am," she said. They shook hands. His grip was firm and brief, the grip of a man who wasn't performing anything. He showed her the house. The kitchen was functional. The stove was a good model, a little dirty from disuse. There were provisions, but they had not been organized. The bedroom he offered her was off the back of the house, small but with a window that faced east, which meant she would have light in the mornings. She put her satchel on the bed and went back out to the yard. "What happened to the water?" she said. He looked at her. "The spring," she said. "There's a depression in the northeast pasture. You can see the old channel from the road. Something filled it in." He was quiet for a moment. "7 years ago," he said. "Spring flood brought a lot of silt. My wife was still alive then. We didn't get around to clearing it." She nodded. She did not say anything about the wife. "The cattle are working the South Creek now," he said, "but it doesn't have enough flow in dry years." "And this is a dry year," she said. "This is a dry year," he agreed. She went inside and started supper. In the morning, she rose before the light changed and walked the northeast pasture alone. She brought a long iron rod she had found in the equipment shed. The ground in the depression was soft, good sign. The original spring hadn't moved, just been buried. She probed down through 3 feet of clay-dense silt before she hit the gravel layer where the water table ran. It was still there, still moving. She came back to the house when the sun was fully up. He was at the table with his coffee. "The spring is there," she said, "under about 3 feet of silt and clay deposit. If you clear it and reopen the channel, you'll have flow again inside 2 weeks. Maybe less." He set his cup down. He looked at her the way a man looks at something he is trying to decide whether to trust. "You know springs," he said. "I know a lot of things," she said, and went to see about breakfast. His name was on the deed as the sole owner of Crest Creek Ranch and Grazing Company. He had built it with his father starting in 1859, and at its peak it had run close to 2,000 head on 12,000 acres. That was before the bad winters of the late 70s, before the drought of 82, before his wife got sick and the hired foreman left with most of the summer wages and a pair of the man's best horses. After his wife died, he had let things run down in the way a person lets things run down when they don't know who they're doing it for anymore. She understood that without being told. She had felt it herself in those 2 winters after the fever took her husband. That particular flatness, the way work becomes motion without purpose. She didn't say any of this to him, but she understood it, and she kept it filed away in the part of herself where she kept things that mattered. His ranch hand was a man named Birch, who had been there 6 months and did his work without complaint. There had been another man before Birch. She had seen the second bedframe in the bunkhouse, but she didn't ask about him. Some things were better left as background. She set about the work. In the first week, she cleared the kitchen, organized the stores, and identified what was low and what was missing. She kept a ledger she had brought from Laramie. A plain one, green cloth cover, nothing fancy. She wrote down what came in and what went out. She asked the man to show her the old records. He pulled a box from under the desk in his study. The records were incomplete, kept in different hands over the years, with gaps she had to estimate around. She estimated carefully. In the second week, she had Birch start digging at the Northeast Depression. The man came out the second afternoon and watched from the fence. She was in the channel herself with a flat spade, moving the compacted silt in sections, working methodically from the center outward. He didn't offer to help and she didn't ask, but he came back the next morning. And the morning after that, and on the 4th day, he climbed over the fence and picked up a shovel without saying anything. They worked together until midday. Then she went in to make dinner, and he stayed on another 2 hours. The water came back on the 9th day. It was just a seep at first, dark and cold, pushing up through the gravel she had exposed at the bottom of the channel. She stood and watched it move, spreading into the cleared basin, finding its level. She did not feel triumphant about it. She felt settled, the way she felt when a thing went as it should. When she told him, he walked out to the northeast pasture in the early evening and stood at the edge of the channel for a long time without speaking. She stood a few feet behind him. After a while, he said, "My wife used to say she could hear it at night from the house. The spring, the water moving under the ground." He paused, said it was the thing that kept the whole place alive. She thought about that. She thought about the way water ran underground for miles in this country, silent and invisible, doing its work without anyone knowing. She wasn't wrong, she said. By late July, the grass in the northeast pasture was coming back. New growth, fine and green, following the moisture line from the reopened spring. She had moved 40 head of cattle to that pasture in rotating shifts. Never too many, never too long. The same system she had learned watching sheep as a girl. The understanding that land needed to rest in cycles, that you could take from it or you could tend it. And one of those paths continued, and one of those paths ended. She charted the rotation in the ledger. She noted which sections were recovering fastest and which still needed time. She compared the grass density to what she had recorded when she arrived. The numbers moved in the right direction. The man watched her work the ledger one evening from the doorway of the study. He didn't come in right away. She heard him there and kept writing. "You keep those like my wife kept her recipe book," he said finally. "How's that? Like it matters that the numbers are right." She looked up. "The numbers are either right or they're not. If they're not, you don't know where you stand." He nodded slowly. "Moira, my wife, she said the same thing. Different words." She wrote his wife's name down on the inside back cover of the ledger. Just the name. She didn't know why. It seemed like the kind of thing that should be written somewhere. In August, a buyer came out from Casper to look at the fall cattle. She sat in on the meeting. The man had not asked her to. She had simply been in the room when the buyer arrived, and neither man said anything about it. She listened to the offer. She watched the buyer's hands when he spoke, the way he touched the rim of his hat when he adjusted a number. He was not dishonest, exactly, but he was buying in a buyer's market and he knew it. When the buyer stepped out to look at the pens, the man turned to her. "Well," he said. "His price on the yearlings is fair," she said. "His price on the 2-year-olds is not. He knows the river operation to the south is in trouble and he thinks you need to move cattle before winter. He's using that." The man looked at her. "Counter at $12 on the 2-year-olds, she said. "He'll come up." He came a long way to look. He countered at 12. The buyer came up to 11.5. They shook on it. After the buyer left, the man stood in the doorway for a moment and looked out at the empty yard. 12 would have been better, he said. 11.50 is better than 10, she said. And better than what you'd have gotten if he knew how thin the water situation was in June. He was quiet. Then he went inside. By September, Birch had hired on a second man, a quiet fellow named Lev, who had come over from a failing spread to the east and knew cattle well. She showed Lev the rotation chart on his second day. He studied it carefully. He asked 2 questions, one about the spring output in winter, one about the north pasture fence line. She answered both and could see from the way he listened that he understood what she was telling him. The ranch ran 4 days without a major problem, then 7 days, then 2 weeks. Small things broke and were fixed. The records kept growing in the ledger. She was out checking the South Creek outlet one afternoon in early October when she heard him coming up behind her on the bay. He rode the horse well, naturally, without thinking about it. She had noticed that early on. The way a person sits a horse tells you a good deal about how they were raised. He dismounted and stood beside her, looking at the water level. "It's down from last week," she said. "Still sufficient, but it'll need watching." He nodded. They stood there a moment. "I owe you," he said. "I work here," she said. "You know what I mean." She did know. She also knew that he was not a man who said things like that carelessly, so when he said it, it meant something. She didn't make it easy for him, and she didn't brush it aside. She just let it sit there between them in the October air. "The northeast pasture will be strong by spring," she said finally. "If we manage the winter rotation right, you'll have 3 times the carrying capacity by May." He looked at her sidelong. The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile. 3 times, he said. "At least," she said, "possibly more if the spring output holds." He mounted the bay. She walked back along the creek toward the barn. Winter came in hard at the end of November. The first storm put 2 feet on the high ground and blocked the road to town for 11 days. She had prepared for it. The stores were sufficient. The cattle were in the right pastures. The firewood was stacked deep under the barn overhang. She had ordered an extra drum of lamp oil in September, when she ran the numbers and saw what the winter might be. They ate supper together every evening during the storm. She had thought this might be awkward, and it wasn't. He was not a man who filled silence for the sake of it, which she respected. They talked about what needed talking about. The herd, the fences, the spring, what the county land agent had said when he came through in October. She told him about the grazing on her father's sheep operation and what she had learned from it about soil recovery. He told her about the first cattle his father had brought over from Texas in '59, how they had lost 1/3 of them in the first winter before they figured out the shelter requirements. One evening he brought out a map he had made with his wife, hand-drawn on butcher paper. The property lines and water sources marked in 2 different hands. His wife's handwriting was rounder than his. She recognized it from a shopping list she had found tucked in the back of the old ledger box. She studied the map. She pointed to a shallow draw on the south boundary. "Is there water here?" she said. "Used to be. Seasonal. If we cleared the beaver dam at the head of it and dug a small retention pond, it would run more reliably." She traced the line with her finger. "It would give you a 3rd water source. Insurance." He looked at where she was pointing. He looked at her. "You've been thinking about this a while," he said. "Since August," she said. He nodded. He didn't say anything else, but he set the map on the desk where they could both see it, and he left it there. In February, a newspaper out of Cheyenne ran a short piece about the territory's largest Lotus cattle rations. It listed Crest Creek Ranch incorrectly. The acreage was wrong, the herd count was wrong by 300 head, and the founding year was listed as 1863 when it was 1859. She read it the evening it arrived and set the paper on the desk. She wrote a short letter to the newspaper's editor. She stated the correct figures, sourced from the property records and from the ledgers, which she cited by year. She asked for a correction in the next edition. She signed her own name as the person responsible for the operation's accounts and land records. She wrote the correct figures in the front of the current ledger on the first page, in the space she had left blank when she started it. Est, 1859. Crest Creek Ranch and Grazing Company, current operation. 1,247 head, 12,400 acres, primary water, Northeast Spring. Reopened June 1886, South Creek, South Draw, pending development. She left room for more. The man found it a few days later. He stood in the study doorway with the ledger open in his hands. She was at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, watching the snow come off the ridge in the early light. "You wrote it down," he said. "Someone had to," she said. He was quiet for a moment. She heard him set the ledger back on the desk. Then he came to the kitchen and poured himself a cup of coffee and sat down across from her. Outside, the snow came off the ridge in long, slow sheets. The spring was still there under the ground, moving under the frost, doing what it did. Neither of them spoke for a while. That was all right. There was nothing that needed to be said that the ledger hadn't already said for them.